Hello, and welcome again to my show, Searching for Integrity. My name really is John Smith, and I'm searching for people with integrity. Why? Because our country suffers from IDD, Integrity Deficit Disorder. Today, we have as our guest Professor Omer Bartov, and he is the author of the book, The Butterfly and the Axe, which I feel interesting just in that. So welcome aboard, Omer.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sure. Now I understand you are a professor of Holocaust and genocide studies at Brown University.
That's correct.
Is that a full time?
Yes, it's a full-time profession. Yeah.
Okay, good. That's great. This book I read here in the media information. It said it's very much grounded in history, and with your ability of all these various countries that you've been into, I think you would probably be the guy to have done this. So we're going to start here, and I'm going to ask you a lot of things that I can bring it up to help my readers, help my listeners. As you know, and others know, that we'll have on January the 27th is the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And I am looking forward to that because I'm having another interview. And it's very interesting to me. Says here, let's see, okay, just making up my mind. As a historian, you can discuss and know how the Russian invasion of Ukraine has a powerful deja vu aspect to it. I bet you get a lot of questions these days about Ukraine. Is that true?
Yes, I've been going to Ukraine now for many years. I've been doing research there since the early 2000s. And so I got to know it quite well and much of its history. And as you say, the one thing that occurred most clearly to me when Russia invaded Ukraine was that history was coming back. It was as if we had forgotten everything that had happened in between, and all those cities that I studied, that when I teach classes on World War II, on the Holocaust appear on the map, suddenly are back on CNN. And that's on its own shocking and depressing, of course, because they don't appear as sites of tourism, but as sites of killing, as they did in World War II. It's also interesting to me because it's in many ways a war about history. There are two different stories being told, one by the Ukrainians and one by the Russians. And the war is about which story is the right one, but it's being decided not, at a university in a conference, but with tanks and guns. And that again takes you back to the middle of the 20th century when the same thing was happening. People decided who was right with might, with artillery and tanks. So that is very depressing. Yeah,
I would think so. It's a lot of people are hoping for a lot of good things, and we don't know what's going to happen. When they ask me something about it, I just kind of throw up my hands. So I don't know any more than you do. So it's let's just hope it ends soon in some way, shape, or form. It's really sad that that's over there, and if you think about it, there's a lot of cold people over there out there right now during winter. Did you happen to live in winter in Ukraine at one time?
Yes, in fact, the first time that I went there, and I went mostly to West Ukraine because I was studying that area in particular. I went there toward the end of winter. I went there in March, which is the sort of mud period. And so you have snow and ice, and then it thaws and turns into mud, and then it freezes over again. So it was cold and it was miserable. Um, the next time I went there, the following year, was in June, and then it's so beautiful. Everything, the sun is out and everything is flowering, and the fields are green, and the snow is gone. But yes, winter can be cold and miserable,
Yes,
and it's a part of that part of the world. Yes.
yes, very much so. I think that people here don't really know much about that and how bad it can be on someone and a lot of people. It's a large population. Interesting information now, of course, are the Ukraine's buying some tanks from the Germans, but they seem to me to not to be too. They're not hurrying about it. Is the way to put it. And I'm thinking they're probably making their own, Poland and so forth. They're thinking about their memories and they're wondering if they want to involve themselves. And I think to the extent the U.S. is the same thing, that it's been slow. A lot of people have been hoping that it would be better for us to provide more information, not just information, but the big guns and the tanks and so forth. I don't know why they do that, but maybe Biden thinks it's something that's going to save him. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I actually started my career as a military historian, and I wrote about the German invasion of the Soviet Union. And so clearly, the memories of World War II, of 3 million German soldiers and thousands of German tanks invading the Soviet Union, which then included Ukraine,
Mhm.
are still, are still there, both in Germany and in Ukraine and in Russia. Uh, but one can draw different lessons from that. One can draw one lesson to say, well, we should never provide any more tanks or guns to that part of the world. Or you can draw a different lesson and say, if you let one country get away with invading another, then it's going to do it again and again until it's stopped. And those who can stop the Russian invasion, which is illegal and criminal, not only Ukraine. Ukraine is doing the fighting, but Ukraine needs help. And what it needs now is tanks. And the best tanks available are German tanks. And
Right.
so my view is that Germany should provide those tanks, drawing the right lesson from World War II, not the wrong one.
Well, hopefully we'll see a positive attitude from the German people. Um, had a number of reviews for your book. It's quite. I'm sure you've read them. I'm sure you're happy with them, and I want to say my listeners listening about it. Um, Here's one that I have a lot of yellow on my page here. As compelling as it is courageous, this is a remarkable work of creative historical excavation. And it is. I haven't read it yet, but I do. I did get a PDF from Lissa, so hopefully I'll be digging into that. Uh,
Thank you.
well, I was interested. I'm a table of contents guy. However, she shipped me the PDF about maybe an hour ago. I had thought that it was always in my computer. She sends me stuff, and I realized it wasn't there. So I looked at it and I thought, oh my God, every one of these chapters is named after a person. Am I right on that?
Yes, it's true. It's true, with the exception of the first two. Um, and the reason is that the book is, if I can explain, the book
Sure,
really
please.
tries to fill in a gap. I researched this region that we were talking about now, West Ukraine, which used to be Eastern Poland, which used to be Eastern Galicia. It had different names in history. I've researched it for 20 years, uh, both as an historian and also because my family comes from there. And my mother was born there and came to Palestine from there in 1935. And after I finished researching it and wrote a big history book about it, I realized that I knew a whole lot about it, but I knew nothing about what happened to my own family. And most of my family was there, and all those who were there were murdered. And I knew nothing about how they were murdered. I knew how they might have been murdered because I reconstructed that, but not specifically about them. And I thought that this is the sort of predicament of the historian, that you can only write what you find in documents. You can't just invent things. You have to write what you can document. But it's so unfair to so many people who don't appear in the archives. They just don't exist there. And so what I did was to write a book that is a historical research on what happened to a particular part of my family. This is a couple with two children who were murdered in a remote Ukrainian village, and I know they were, but trying to excavate it through documents that don't exist. That is through accounts given by people, some who are real people and some who are invented people, but accounts that I don't have, that I had to write myself. And so, in a sense, it's a puzzle of different accounts by different people saying what happened there. What really happened there, of course, is someplace in between those accounts. We'll never exactly know, but we have confessions, we have letters, we have conversations, testimonies, courtroom testimonies, and all of them are invented apart from one. And I don't say which one. One of them is an actual document. So that's why it's really about people talking about what happened, telling different stories about it.
So those sources, though, are very good, I would think. When you start blending fact and fiction, you need all the all the stories you can hear that plays into the whole book. It's a book that is going to see a lot of ancestors unmanageable. It's and when you find that, I guess you've been tracking some of that over and over and over, and finally, the right person walks into the room, and then all of a sudden, it's just you do it again.
Yeah.
I thought that beautifully written and touchingly authentic. This is a book that will stay with you forever. And that's the kind of wording that people are motivated to go buy your book. That's why
Yes.
God made reviews.
Well, I'm very grateful to the reviewers, of course.
Oh,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yeah. I should say that one thing that I tried that was very important for me in this book is not only to try to reconstruct what happened, but to understand how something that happened in the past that we don't know all the details about has had repercussions over several generations of people. So that both in a Jewish family from Israel and in a Ukrainian family that lives in Britain, that particular murder, had an effect on three generations of people. And I was very interested in trying to reconstruct what that is, how this untold, not entirely known case of murder in many ways warped people's identities, and that the only way that they can somehow come to terms with it is to return to the scene of the crime, to actually try and understand what happened. And those who are from two different sides of the event can come together there and find some kind of reconciliation. So in that sense, it's both about the past and it's about the present, and how the past informs the present in ways that we're not always aware of, but must somehow come to terms with.
Yes, yes, yes. Well said. I think that I think people are going to be happy. I'm not sure happy for how long. Sometimes people are going to have a national grudge in one way or another. When was the last Ukraine, Russia? When was it? In the 60s, in the 70s, or is it?
Well, Ukraine has a very complicated history, but in 1944, in the latter part of World War II, all this area that was under Soviet rule since the Russian Revolution is liberated from German rule, right? The Germans occupy it, and then the Red Army comes back. And this entire area is under Soviet rule until 1991. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapses. And then Ukraine, which is one of the republics of the Soviet Union, it's a Soviet Socialist Republic, declares independence. And the Russians are not very happy about that, because that's part of the old Russian Empire and then the Soviet Empire. But the Ukrainians have wanted to be independent since the 17th century. And finally, they become independent. But in 2014, Russia invades eastern Ukraine and annexes Crimea. So the war that we are seeing now actually did not begin last February, but began for Ukrainians in 2014. And it's just that in February 24th last year, the Russians invaded the rest of Ukraine. So that's a war that's been going on now for years and years, with tens of thousands of people killed on both sides by now.
Are you, because this has gone on and on and on, are you thinking in terms of, say, a sequel?
To this book? I am. I mean, this book, of course, is not about the current war, though it sort of ends up there. I am, but the sequel I'm thinking about is actually from a different place and time. My first language is Hebrew. I was born and raised in Israel. I love reading the Bible, the Old Testament. I love biblical stories. And so the next book I want to write is actually what I call the Wars of the Philistines. And the Philistines in the sense of the Philistines the biblical Philistines. Right. And so it will be a book that, a kind of historical novel, but from that time, about which we know very little, between the period of Samson and Delilah to the death of King Saul and Jonathan in the battle with the Philistines in the beginning of King David. So I'm interested in that period because, of course, it has parallels with conditions in Israel right now, the ongoing struggle between Jews and Palestinians. But I want to look at it through that biblical story. So it is about war. It is, yes, and it's about this complexity of different peoples living side by side, sometimes marrying, sometimes killing each other, but it takes it back to those ancient times.
You strike me as being very happy when you're writing your next book. It's you enjoy it quite a bit, don't you?
I'm actually dying to start doing it. I now have all kinds of other things that I have to do, but the minute I can, that's exactly what I want to do. Yes.
That's fantastic. It really is. People don't have that which you will have. Um, I've been self-employed since I can't remember, and
Yes.
I wake up and I say, oh, what do I want to do today? Something better than I did yesterday. Uh, you know,
Yes, well, you must have a love of writing, and I love writing. I'm when I write, I'm in a different place. I don't notice anything else that's going on.
right.
I'm just in my own universe, and I love that.
Yes, yeah. It's
When it goes well, it doesn't always go well, but it
no,
does.
not at all. Right. Well, and also then for my book, I was in the summer of 17 or 18, and it was in Denver, and it felt right there with the altitude. It felt right. And then before I knew it, I had a friend of mine who helped me. He passed away, and then he pops in every now and then, giving me some tips. Gets me back on track.
Yes, yeah.
And that makes it even better. Another question though is what is the new Jewish fiction?
Well, I'm not a literary critic. I can't really answer that question. What is the new rather than the old Jewish fiction? And I don't know that I belong to one or the other. I'm not young. I actually wrote two novels many years ago in the 1980s in Hebrew.
Hmm.
And at the time, I was part of the new generation of Israeli authors. But since then, I'm no longer part of the new generation. So I'm not sure, but I do know that there is now a big flourishing of
Yes.
young Jewish authors, and that
Mhm.
much of what they write has some similarities, not in style, but in topic with what I wrote. That is, of trying to reimagine the world that their ancestors came from in different ways.
Mhm.
And so that may be part of that. It's less about second, third generation immigrants who are writing about their immigrant experience and more actually going back to the world from which their ancestors had come and trying to think about it in literary terms.
Well, you have the opportunity as a historian the ability to discuss how the Russian invasion of Ukraine has a powerful deja vu aspect to it. You've already described a lot of that. It's so many of the sites being fought over and destroyed right now were already sites of violence and genocide in World War II. And they're just stomping over the same ground. When are we going to stop this? And then if somebody, you hear that lock and load, then you don't want to try and figure out at that point. You want to get your head in a deep hole, I think. It's something I think that you're probably going to use, but that's my opinion. I'm going to buy your book for
Thank
sure.
you.
I am, and I'm going to have to get on the phone with Lissa and the as my listeners have probably dwelled in on this quite a bit. For me, I'd like to know, and my listeners, audience, would like to know where your books are going to be sold. Do you know?
So I think from what I know, the easiest way to buy the book is through either Amazon or Barnes and Noble. There is a paperback, a hardcover, and a Kindle edition, which is really cheap from what I saw. If you can read it on a tablet, So, I mean, I think this is the easiest way. And the book actually will be available as of January 27th, which is, as you said, International Holocaust Day.
3 days to launch.
Yes. It's very exciting.
Yes, very exciting. You're a lucky guy.
Yeah.
I tell my listeners, thank you for them to be listening and for you to be our guest today. It's been a great portal has opened for me in that word, in that sense. And for thank you again for being on my show. And I need to say to my listeners for tuning in to Searching for Integrity, so long and happy trails to all.